Hello everyone, please press subscribe, press follow, press the bell so you don't miss any new clips. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Author by Flying Alone. Audio novels by Novelist. Chapter 191, The Golden Flower of the Stone. Ling Han broke the rock apart in a few moves, and the golden light became stronger and stronger, before finally becoming a ball of resplendent light, so bright that it was not possible to open one's eyes to look at it. But the golden light very quickly paled and darkened, and in Ling Han's hand, there shockingly appeared a golden plant. It looked like a chrysanthemum. The whole flower was sparkling and translucent, possessing an indescribable beauty to it. Oh! Everyone was exclaiming in shock. There was actually such a strange object growing inside a rock. No matter what it was really inconceivable. Return this flower to me. The stall keeper instantly shouted, his eyes red. Even if he had no idea what it was, he would have been able to guess that a plant growing within a rock was definitely an extraordinary treasure and not something that can be bought with a mere 2,000 silver coins. He had finally understood by now. Ling Han had only pretended to be scared previously, but in fact, he had already had his eye fixed on this rock. This detestable brat. Ling Han only pretended he had not heard anything, and asked Hu Niu, do you know what this is? Hu Niu sniffed it a few times, and instantly, put on a disinterested expression, and said, it's not delicious. Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, this is called the golden flower of the stone. It is formed through gathering spiritual chi from its surroundings and can only grow within this kind of stone of 9 poisons. It has the effect of curing poison. Only a tiny little petal would be enough to cure many of the poisons of this world. The stem is even more outstanding, as it can cure any poison. Brother, this golden flower of the stone is probably worth a lot, right? One of the spectators asked. Of course. Ling Han nodded. It is unavoidable for martial artists to enter into areas that are filled with powerful poison to adventure, and merely placing a single petal of the golden flower of the stone in one's mouth would allow one to resist many poisons. Tell me, how much do you think it's worth? A petal is worth 10,000 silver coins. Someone asked, his voice shaking. 10,000 coins. Ling Han shook his head with a smile, and said, the rewards would naturally be overwhelmingly large if one actually had to enter such a dangerous location on an adventure. It would be nothing strange to spend several million, or even several dozen million just to prepare for such a journey. As a result, a single petal of this flower would be worth 100,000 coins, at the very least. There was a simultaneous sharp intake of breath from all around them. A price of at least 100,000 coins, that was really too terrifying, because this golden flower of the stone had exactly how many petals? At the very least, there were a few hundred petals there, then that would be worth about a few dozen million. Moreover, the stem could apparently cure any conceivable poison, so it was naturally worth even more money. Ha, brat, give me back my golden flower of the stone. The stall keeper was also listening to Ling Han's explanation just now, and now that he knew the astronomical value of this golden flower, he was both shocked and delighted. He was secretly laughing at Ling Han for being an idiot, to actually reveal the existence of such a treasure in the public, and was also secretly delighted inside his heart. He was really going to make a huge amount of money this time round. Is there something wrong with you? Ling Han smiled calmly. This is already mine, so what does it have to do with you? This is your money, I'm giving it back. The stall keeper threw out 2 monetary notes. Now, give back my golden flower of the stone. The transaction has been completed, so this item is naturally mine. And I have no intention to sell it off to you, Ling Han said seriously. Ha, who would dare not to sell me something that I, Ruin Shizhong, want? The stall keeper smirked, and stretched out a hand towards Ling Han's neck. Hu Niu moved. One smack from her, and with a pang, Ruin Shizhong was instantly flung away, crashing heavily into a wall before slowly sliding down it. He had actually been smacked unconscious. Everyone was astonished. How could a little girl who was only about 5 to 6 years old have such powerful strength? Ling Han grabbed a piece of cloth and wrapped the golden flower of the stone in it. In such a public area, he dared not reveal the secret of the spatial ring. He turned to look at the other 4 ruffians, and asked with a smile, "Are you guys planning to snatch my stuff, too?" The 4 men hurriedly shook their heads, a layer of cold sweat collecting on their foreheads. Ruin Shizhong was the strongest of the 5 of them. He was in the 8th layer of body refining tier, and was actually smacked unconscious so easily by a little snip of a girl, so it was predictable that this young man would be even more remarkable. He was definitely playing the pig to eat the tiger just now, definitely pretending to be harmless previously to fool them. Just now, this guy deliberately showed his fear, and was only trying to toy around with them. Now, they had, with their own hands, sold off a priceless treasure for the cheap price of 2,000 coins. Whenever they recalled this in the future, they would definitely grieve and lament, with an increasing urge to commit suicide. To them, this was the heaviest kind of punishment. No wonder this brat revealed the golden flower of the stone in public, he was trying to provoke them. Damn him. Ling Han held onto Hunyu's hand and left proudly. Lu Yutong smiled, because she knew that Ling Han must have noticed something about the rock to put on such an act. The 2 adults and 1 child left very quickly, leaving behind the envious and impressed gazes of the crowd. Big brother Shizhong. The 4 ruffians hurriedly went to help ruin Shizhong up. After pinching his Renjong and pouring cold water on him, they finally managed to pull ruin Shizhong back to consciousness. Ah! Ruin Shizhong shouted loudly. My treasure! He suddenly jumped up from the ground, and realized that there were people looking at him from all around, wearing expressions that showed they were enjoying his misfortune. He could not help but flush brightly at this, both humiliated and enraged. Big brother Shizhong, what do we do now? The 4 ruffians asked. Ruin Shizhong thought for a moment, then said, 2 of you follow that brat and see where he's going. The other 2 of you will come back with me and ask Hall Leader AI to step out and snatch back the treasure. But, Big brother Shizhong, if we ask for Hall Leader Ai's help, the biggest share will definitely have to go to him. One of the ruffians said cautiously. Pa! Ruin Shizhong gave him a slap and rebuked him, are you an idiot? If we don't get Hall Leader AI to deal with that brat, we won't get anything at all. If Hall Leader AI manages to snatch back the treasure, then we'd at least get something. Right. Big brother Shizhong is indeed clever. The 4 ruffians nodded in agreement. Then let's go. Ruin Shizhong glared at him. What about the things here? One of the ruffians pointed at the items still laid out in the stall. They're not worth much anyways. Moreover, who would dare to steal my stuff? The 5 of them immediately went off on their respective missions. 2 followed behind Ling Han, while the other 3 went off to get help. How could they bear to simply let the matter go when it involved a treasure that was worth a few dozen million? Young Master Han, there's someone following us, Lu Yutong said suddenly. Just let 'em follow. When there's enough of them later, I'll deal with them in one go, Ling Han said, smiling. Niu wants to beat up 10. Who knew? Said excitedly. The little girl had grown up by the side of a ferocious beast, and her wild nature was very dominant a part of her personality. She was especially fond of violence. All right. Ling Han laughed. There was an extremely weird spirit base in the body of this little girl. In the future, even the whole world could possibly tremble because of her, what more just to beat up 10 people. Lu Yutong could not help but roll her eyes. Ling Han actually taught who knew like this, wasn't he just egging her on to do whatever she liked? As they walked, they soon arrived at the Heaven Military Hall. This was indeed a lively place. There was a great hall that was a dazzling sight, while a square-shaped plaza surrounded it on all sides. There was a large number of people on this plaza, and there were even some who were holding on to signs for recruitment, in order to form a group to complete a mission. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, let's hold up signs for recruitment as well. They never imagined that buying a sign here would be so expensive. The seller actually quoted a price of 10 silver coins. Ling Han did not mind, but Lu Yutong could not bear wasting money so pointlessly and glared furiously at the seller for quite a while. Ling Han began to write on the sign in his good penmanship. Then he tied it in a fixed position on a rock. Instantly, he became the focus of everyone's attention. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 192. Going to the Earth and Water faction for a walk. That was because the words written on the sign that Ling Han had put up were indeed a bit shocking. Recruiting people to go to the Earth and Water faction for a fight. Rewards are as follows: Gushing Spring Tier, 10,000 silver coins per day, Spiritual Ocean Tier, 100,000 silver coins per day, Element Gathering Tier need not apply. Go to the Earth and Water faction for a fight. What kind of a place was the Earth and Water faction? It had a Spiritual Ocean Tier elite to oversee things, and was at the same level as a middle-class clan. Going there to fight, then that would mean having to stand against a Spiritual Ocean Tier elite. There were only so many Spiritual Pedestal Tier elites in Rain Country, and underneath Spiritual Pedestal Tier, the strongest would be Spiritual Ocean Tier. Who would dare go to make trouble? However, on the other hand, the rewards that Ling Han promised were indeed enough of a shock themselves. A Gushing Spring Tier martial artist would be able to earn 10,000 in one day, while a Spiritual Ocean Tier martial artist could earn 100,000 per days. Earning 100,000 per days, that would mean earning 3 million in a single month. What kind of unbelievable concept was that? Even if it was a great clan like one of the 8 great clans, their net monthly income would not exceed 10 million. And now a single person would be able to earn 3 million. That was comparable to 1/3 of the monthly income of a great clan. How shocking was that? Moreover, the 8 great clans were only able to earn so much profit because they had Spiritual Pedestal Tier elites in their ranks, and now 3 Spiritual Ocean Tier martial artists would be able to earn about the same amount. All of a sudden, this attracted the attention of a lot of people, but all of them were merely watching. None actually approached to get the exact details of the mission. After all, Ling Han was really much too young. Who would believe that he would be able to produce such a massive sum of money? Moreover, the Earth and Water faction was nothing to play around with. Thus, everyone merely chose to stand by and watch at this point in time. You can't simply set up a sign here. If the contract has not obtained the acknowledgement and guarantee of the Heaven Military Hall, everyone will not believe that you really have such wealth, Lu Yutong reminded. All right, then, let's go inside then. Ling Han strode towards the Heaven Military Hall. He came to a free window, and said, I would like to post a mission. Young master, what mission would you like to post? The young girl who was in charge of registering missions asked. She was quite a pretty girl. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, going to the Earth and Water faction for a fight. The young girl's pretty face twitched uncontrollably. She was naturally aware of what kind of place the Earth and Water faction was. She shook her head quickly, and said, young master, don't joke around. The Earth and Water faction is a party of the Imperial City. Putting aside whether you have such ability, young master, even if you do have, the Imperial Guards will still stop you from going there to make trouble. The Heaven Military Hall will not accept such a request. Then, how about this? Ling Han thought for a moment, then said, change it to going to the Earth and Water faction for a walk, recruiting people to protect me. For a walk? The young girl's mouth once again twitched. Who would simply allow intruders to enter into their home to take a walk? There's no problem with this kind of request, right? Ling Han asked, smiling. On the surface, there was naturally no issue with going for a walk, but anyone would know that this going for a walk was actually going for a fight. The young girl grimaced, then said, there is indeed no problem, but, young master. If there's no problem, then hang up the mission for me. You do not have to bother about any other things. Ling Han smiled, handed over some monetary notes, and said, the rewards are as follows. He recited the rewards list, then added, 10 Spiritual Ocean Tier martial artists would be enough, and Gushing Spring Tier, 100 should be good enough. The expression of the pretty young girl immediately changed. What a humongous expense was this? Her first reaction was that Ling Han must be joking, but there was nothing false about the monetary notes that he had handed over. The total amount was 6 million. It was enough to hire such a group for up to 3 days. This young master was an extremely rich young man. She hurriedly registered Ling Han's request. Anyways, as long as there was no breach of the Heaven Military Hall's rules and the rewards were paid, then however weird or bizarre a request it was, it would be announced to all the members of the Heaven Military Hall. Because the reward for this request was so colossal, it instantly became the focus of attention. What? Hiring bodyguards to go for a walk at the Earth and Water faction? Is this some kind of joke? Don't care whether it's a joke or not. Now that it is posted, then that means that there is absolutely no problem with the validity of the reward. Hiss. A day equals 10,000. If you're in Spiritual Ocean tier, you can even earn 100,000. The whole plaza became lively. Some of them recalled the signboard that Ling Han had put up previously, and they went over to find him. Ling Han was already standing there, and those people immediately began inquiring him about the details of the request. Young master, I am in the 9th layer of element gathering tier, and have 1 foot into gushing spring tier. How about it? I only want 5,000 silver coins. I am in the 8th layer of element gathering tier, and I only require 4,000 coins. Those inquiring were mostly all in element gathering tier, and were only there to join in on the excitement. Meanwhile, those Spiritual Ocean tier elites were merely observing. After all, the Earth and Water faction was not something to joke about. Ling Han merely pointed at the sign that he had put up. What did he need element gathering tier martial artists for? He himself was in the 9th layer of element gathering tier, and gathering a bunch of lackeys at this level was not impressive enough. His eyes swept over the surroundings, when a smile suddenly appeared on his face. He walked forwards, where a middle-aged man was sitting on a stone lion. There was a wine gourd in his hand, and he kept pouring wine into his mouth endlessly. Yee, this brat has quite good eyes, to actually fix his eye on Master Xuanhuan. What? The Master Xuanhuan who is known to be able to shatter a mountain with 7 punches. That's right. He's one of the top 10 strongest warriors of our Heaven Military Hall. Hiss. His cultivation level is the 5th layer of Spiritual Ocean tier. In the past, he was also considered as a genius of martial arts, but for some unknown reason, has been stagnating on the 5th layer of Spiritual Ocean tier for such a long time. Are you an idiot? Every step in Spiritual Ocean tier is as difficult as climbing to heaven. It is not uncommon for some to be stuck for their whole life in this tier. When they saw that middle-aged man, everyone exclaimed in shock. Ling Han naturally did not know that this large man's name was Xuanhuan. He had only noticed the latter's cultivation level, and so had decided to approach him. However, as his attention became more focused, he found out even more information, and he could not help but smile. The more you drink to forget your troubles, the more troubled you will feel, he said to Xuanhuan. What does a little brat know about troubles? Xuanhuan asked calmly, not even turning around to look at Ling Han. You're cultivating the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll, right? Ling Han lowered his voice considerably, only loud enough for just Xuanhuan to hear. Xuanhuan's expression changed drastically, and he could not help but stop his actions of continuing to drink. He looked towards Ling Han, and similarly lowered his voice to a whisper, and asked, how did you know? I not only know that you're cultivating the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll, I also know that you have made some mistake in your cultivation. At present, isn't the 3rd bone on your spine faintly aching? Ling Han asked calmly. This time, Xuanhuan could no longer maintain his composure. He suddenly leaped up from the stone lion, stood in front of Ling Han, and asked, who are you? It was only in this year that he had discovered there was a problem in his cultivation, and the symptoms were exactly like what Ling Han had pointed out, the 3rd bone of his spine would faintly ache. Come, come, come. Accept my request, and I will give you a very fortunate opportunity. It will not only solve your current problem, you may even be able to advance further, Ling Han said, smiling faintly, like a demon bewitching a human. It was only now that Xuanhuan saw the sign that Ling Han had put up. He could not help but wear a strange expression, and said, "You have quite a bold personality." "Not too bad. That's why I'm looking for a few bodyguards," Ling Han said, smiling. A thoughtful expression appeared on Xuanhuan's face. Since Ling Han could tell that he was cultivating the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll, and could also tell that he had encountered a problem in his cultivation, then that would imply that there was a very high chance that Ling Han could solve his problem. He decided to take the gamble. "All right then, I'll accept this request." Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 193, Successfully Gathering a Group. Xuanhuan had not purposely lowered his voice when he said this, so those around them heard his words very clearly. "What? Shatter a mountain with 7 punches, Master Xuanhuan has accepted the request." That's Master Xuanhuan we're talking about here. With Master Xuanhuan there, what's there to be afraid of? I'm applying too. When they saw that Xuanhuan had accepted the request, a considerable number of gushing spring tier elites too exclaimed, expressing their interest. "Please go to the main hall to obtain the mission," Ling Han said, smiling. "Then, come back here to gather. Is today considered one day as well?" They all thought that this was inconceivable. "Of course," Ling Han said casually. This brat definitely had to have enough money to burn. It was almost noon by now, which meant that half the day's money had already been burnt. However, such a rich employer would be favored by everyone, wouldn't he? With the participation of a spiritual ocean tier elite, the rest were naturally feeling braver. Even if the sky fell down on them, there would be someone taller to hold it up. The power of setting an example was great, as very soon, there were other elites of spiritual ocean tier who decided to accept the request. In this manner, so what if they decided to barge into the earth and water faction? If Yang Tiandu did not want to participate in a conflict that would damage both sides equally, he would only be able to swallow his anger. The more spiritual ocean tier elites accepted the request, the more attractive this mission naturally became. Anyways, they only needed to keep Ling Han safe, and there was no need for them to flout the law in any way, so they would at least be able to retreat unscathed from this. After another hour had passed, the 100 gushing spring tier martial artists were successfully gathered. In fact, there were even more gushing spring tier martial artists who were interested in joining, but Ling Han did not need too many of them. However, there were only 7 spiritual ocean tier elites. After all, spiritual ocean tier elites could definitely be considered the absolutely elite powerful warriors. It was not an easy feat for a lone cultivator to make it this far. In fact, being able to recruit 7 of such powerful warriors in just over an hour's time was enough of a miraculous feat itself. Firstly, it was because the rewards that Ling Han had posted were attractive enough, and secondly, with the participation of Xuanhuan, he influenced those who were still wavering and hesitating to join. 7 spiritual ocean tier elites should be about enough. Ling Han considered for a moment. Though it was not as impressive as having 10 to back him, it was not too bad either. "Young Master Han, when are we leaving?" Those gathered asked Ling Han. Though they were all at a higher cultivation level than Ling Han, but who asked him to be their employer. Lone cultivators were not as proud as the clan members of prominent clans. Otherwise, they would definitely not be addressing Ling Han as young Master Han, unless they knew his background. When those who went to accept the mission return, we'll set out, Ling Han said. All right. Everyone nodded, practically able to see in their mind's eye a huge sum of money waving at them. That's him. It was at this moment that a man nearby pointed at Ling Han, his face filled with fury. It was Ruin Shizhong who had previously forced Ling Han to buy his merchandise and attempted to force him to sell it back. There were a few other people around him. 4 of them were his lackeys, and there was another middle-aged man, who had a much steadier aura about him. This man was a gushing spring tier elite. The middle-aged man's name was Ai Song, and he was one of the hall leaders of the Earth and Water faction. When he heard Ruin Shizhong tell him about the incident involving the golden flower of the stone, he instantly could not hold back his greed and followed them here. Brat, Ruin Shizhong of our faction mistakenly sold off a treasured item of our faction. Give us back the treasured item. AI Song shouted at Ling Han, a haughty expression on his face. Those who had agreed to accept Ling Han's request immediately looked fierce at this. Their mission was to ensure Ling Han's safety. They never thought that the enemies would already appear, when they hadn't even stepped out of Heaven Military Hall. It was indeed quite intriguing. These lone cultivators were all living on the edge of danger. It could be claimed that they had managed to come this far on their path of cultivation all with their own power. Of course, there were a few who had done despicable acts before, such as robbery and murder. They were more rounded, tougher, and more warlike than those who had grown up under the protection of their respective clans. It was too bad that AI Song did not have enough self-awareness and felt too secure in himself, so sure that he would be able to easily dominate such a youngster like Ling Han. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, he sold it and I bought it, so the item is naturally mine. I don't have any interest to sell it off, so get lost. Get lost. AI Song's previously haughty expression became extremely ugly, as if he had been suddenly punched, and he asked darkly, Brat, do you know who I am? An idiot trying to give me a laugh, Ling Han said, smiling. What? AI Song was stunned for a moment, before looking extremely enraged. Ling Han continued, I realize that all idiots have a common characteristic, and that is they all like to ask, do you know who I am? Or, are you aware of who I am? How the fuck should I know what idiot you are? You're seeking death. AI Song finally could no longer hold himself back. He gave a great leap and pounced towards Ling Han, delivering a punch. He wanted to severely injure this brat who had spoken such insolent words. Get back, idiot. A figure leaped out and similarly threw a punch towards AI Song. Peng! The two men's fists collided against each other, instantly creating a visible ripple that spread out in all directions. AI Song trembled, and Teng, retreated a whole 13 steps. The other person was also forced backwards, though he merely took 7 steps backwards. AI Song could not help but reveal a resentful expression, and said, what a good brat to actually dare to speak so insolently to me. So there is someone to back you. And who are you? Are you aware of who I am? When he spoke the last words, he suddenly recalled what Ling Han had said just now, and could not help but look slightly embarrassed. How do I know who you are, idiot? The man shrugged. He was naturally one of the bodyguards that Ling Han had recruited. His name was Xuanhuan, and he was in the 4th layer of gushing spring tear. Ha 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 ha. The others began to laugh as well. AI Song gave a humph, and said, don't think that you are powerful enough to dominate over me. I had just been a bit careless just now. This was the truth. He naturally could not beat Ling Han to death, so had used very little power in that punch just now. I am AI Song, the Hall leader of the Loyalty Hall of Earth and Water faction. Do you still intend to stand against me? He added. Everyone could not help but say, oh. No wonder he seemed to hold such a grudge against Ling Han, because Ling Han was indeed going to deal with the Earth and Water faction. They did not know that they had not guessed correctly at all. Get lost. Xuanhuan glared. Though lone cultivators were very weak on their own, they still had one advantage, and that was the fact they had nothing to worry about. They did not have to worry about such things like if any conflict would rise up between their clan and their opponent's clan, because they had no clan. If they wanted to fight, they would. If they weren't strong enough to beat their opponent, they could flee. In the worst-case scenario, they could hide somewhere for a few years. Very good. To actually dare to go against our Earth and Water faction, how bold, AI Song said furiously. Ling Han walked towards Ruin Shizhong, smiled, and said, it just so happens that I don't know where the lair of the Earth and Water faction is. Let us there then. Insolence. AI Song once again acted, but Xuanhuan once again punched out and blocked his attack. Ling Han stretched out a hand to grab him, and Ruin Shizhong was easily subdued. He smiled faintly, and said, I gave you a chance. It's too bad you did not cherish it, and came back to make trouble with me. You should know that there will not always be second chances available in life. Pa. His hands moved, and Ruin Shizhong's right arm was instantly broken, hanging on at a terrifying angle. It was a sight that would make anyone shiver. Ah! Ruin Shizhong instantly wailed in agony. This time, not just AI Song, even Xuanhuan and the others were extremely shocked, because it was not a small issue to cause injury to another in such a public area in the imperial city. This brat was really a bit too ruthless, wasn't he? Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 194. You extort me. Good, good, good. You dare harm the people of Earth and Water faction, you're seeking your own death. AI Song smiled coldly, and turned to leave. He wasn't running, but he was going to find the Imperial Guards. A place like Heavenel Military Hall where there were many martial artists and lone martial artists who were ill-tempered and impulsive was one where a fight could break out just because of a single disagreement. So, there were Imperial Guards posted here to deter troublemakers and police the area. Master Han, it's troublesome now, said someone pointing at Ruin Shizhong. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, no matter. Xuanhuan and the others frowned and thought that Ling Han was too arrogant. Those who went against the imperial law never came to a good end. Just a short while later, AI Song led 2 imperial guards over. These 2 imperial guards were only at 9th element gathering tier, but as they approached, everyone made way. The people weren't scared of those 2, but of the uniforms on them that represented the Emperor's power and law. These 2 sirs, this is the child publicly harming people at Heaven Military Temple, said AI Song pointing at Ling Han who was still in control of the whimpering Ruin Shizhong. It was practically irrefutable evidence. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't irresponsibly speak as you wish. This guy fell on his own, breaking even his arm. I kindly helped him up. I'll let it pass that I'm not even given a Good Samaritan award, but how could you extort me? This not only enraged AI Song, but also made Xuanhuan and the others speechless. This guy was too good at making stuff up, even going as far as making a bogus claim. What really happened? Said an imperial guard, who looked towards Ling Han with a hint of awe. This was really inconceivable that the law enforcement team belonging directly to the Emperor's family would revere a young man, but the truth was so. Ling Han knew that they recognized his identity. 2 great alchemy masters backed him, so how could they not know him considering the grasp of the Emperor's family? Thus, the Imperial Guards definitely received orders that as long as Ling Han didn't commit murder and arson, no amount of disturbance would matter. Contrarily, if Ling Han faced danger, these Imperial Guards would have to protect him, or they wouldn't be able to justify themselves to the 2 great alchemy masters. However, from this, it could be seen that Feng Yan had an even more terrifying background, because when Feng Yan slashed the cart on the streets, no Imperial Guards ran out and just let him stir up trouble all they wanted. 2 sirs, the situation is clear, this guy is the culprit. AI Song shouted. An Imperial Guard's expression turned solemn, and he said, this young master said it well. Words shouldn't be said irresponsibly. Do you have proof? Proof? Did this still need proof? It couldn't be more obvious, or were you too blind? AI Song had a stomach full of rage, but with the thought of the status of these Imperial Guards, he could only calmly say, Ruin Shizhong, you come tell these 2 sirs. Ruin Shizhong endured the pain, and said, 2 sirs, it's him, he was the one who broke my arm. He was tricked by Ling Han into giving the golden flower of the stone, slapped dizzy by who knew, and now his arm was broken by Ling Han. Naturally, he hated Ling Han and Ling Han's companions to the bones. Pa. Ling Han immediately slapped Ruin Shizhong in the back of his head, and said coldly, you shameful thing. I kindly helped you up, yet you bite like a mad dog. Do I look easy to bully? Ruin Shizhong almost fainted. He forcefully bought and sold, not counting how many evil deeds he'd done, but being unjustly treated was a first. He felt so aggrieved that his veins were going to explode. He did it. Ruin Shizhong's 4 underlings all stood forward to testify. Lord's Imperial Guards, we're all witnesses, surely we're not all trying to extort him, said Ai Song coldly. Oh, so you can make up facts with more witnesses. Ling Han laughed lightly, then turned to speak to the crowd. Did I break this man's arm? No. Xuanhuan and the others all said with a smile. The lone cultivators often have wild and intractable dispositions, some even wished for mayhem. Naturally, they all started to stir up a fuss. Ling Han shrugged, and said, these 2 Imperial Guard brothers, you both heard them. I have more witnesses that say I didn't break this guy's arm. Shameless. Ai Song's face twitched. Water and Earth faction could be said as the most infamous force within the Imperial City. As long as money could be made, all jobs were accepted no matter how dirty it was. But even Ai Song wanted to yell out, shameful. It was apparent how angry Ling Han made him. Boy, is it really wise for you to go against Earth and Water faction? He said threateningly. Dear Imperial Guard brothers, this guy is threatening me, you all heard, right? If anything happens to me from today on, just look for him, said Ling Han quickly. The 2 Imperial Guards immediately looked towards Ai Song, and one of them said, Sir Ai Song, please be careful, some words should not be said irresponsibly. Ai Song's cheek twitched. Was the Imperial Army established by this boy? Why did they side with him so much? 2 Imperial Guard brothers, there is nothing going on here that needs your attention, so how about you go back to relax and drink some tea? Ling Han said with a smile. The 2 Imperial Guards threw a quick warning glance at Ai Song. Do not cause any trouble, or even the Earth and Water faction won't be able to shield you. Having said that, the 2 soon turned around and left. This made Ai Song realize that Ling Han's background was definitely not ordinary. He gave Ling Han a deep look, then said, young man, just what is your identity? So you don't know, how do you get by in the Imperial City? Ling Han shook his head, then continued, go back to Yangtiandu. Tell him I'll be going on a walk to visit the Earth and Water faction soon, so he should prepare. What? Ai Song raised his voice involuntarily. You actually dare to come to our Earth and Water faction? What? Do you want me to tell me that the Earth and Water faction is some kind of a dragon's pond or a tiger's cave? If there's really some dragon there, then it'll have to coil before me, and if there's a tiger, it'll have to lie down for me. Ling Han gestured for him to leave by waving his hands, and said, get lost. I have no time for a nobody like you. Good, good, good. Ai Song clenched his teeth. First of all, he was unable to do anything with Husan present here. Second of all, the Imperial Guards here were too chummy with Ling Han. Calling them in again would be just a waste of time and effort. Filled with hate, he turned around and left. As for Ruin Shizhong, he was naturally completely ignored by him. There were plenty of such nobodies in the Earth and Water faction, let alone one. Even if 100 or 1,000 died, it wouldn't matter. My lord, my lord. Ruin Shizhong followed the departing Ai Song with a look full with despair. Ling Han even dared to break his arms in front of Ai Song, so would Ling Han kill him now? Ruin Shizhong couldn't help but tremble in fear and almost pissed himself. Don't worry, I abide by the law. How could I possibly kill you? Ling Han smiled at him. Well, what are you waiting for? Lead the way. We're going for a walk to the Earth and Water faction. Ruin Shizhong and his 4 sidekicks were helpless, and could only go forward to lead the way while secretly praying that Ling Han would walk right into a trap upon their arrival and suffer big time. However, when they saw that the number of people following Ling Han was over 100, they almost pissed themselves again. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 195, Barging In. Ling Han and his group made for a grand display. There was a smile with hidden depths around the lips of Xuanhuan and the rest. They were all lone cultivators and had untamed temperaments, but none of them were idiots. When they saw the attitude of those 2 Imperial Guards, they realized that Ling Han was definitely someone from a prominent background. After all, even the Imperial Guards seemed to have gone blind and acted so partial towards him in the conflict. It seemed like there wouldn't be any mishaps happening on this trip. There were only 3 spiritual ocean tier and a few dozen gushing spring tier martial artists in the Earth and Water faction, much worse off than their group in terms of quality. The group proudly walked through the streets, and soon arrived at the Earth and Water faction. Though the Earth and Water faction was named a faction, in truth, there was not much difference between it and any other ordinary clan-based party. They had a very large courtyard in the Imperial City, and all the high-ranking leaders of the faction lived here. Currently, there was a state of alert in the area at the main doors. Obviously, AI Song had returned with his information and the Earth and Water faction had reacted accordingly. Mister, you first snatched a treasure from one of the members of our faction, and now you come here so forcefully. Do you think that there is no one who can stand against you in our Earth and Water faction and are trying to bully us? An old man asked darkly, a very powerful aura emanating from him. Ling Han could not help but laugh. It seemed that the Earth and Water faction mistakenly believed that the whole matter was due to the golden flower of the stone. He shook his head, and said, "Your intelligence department is really too poor, isn't it? You crashed so many of my shops, and don't even know who I am." The old man was an elder of the Earth and Water faction, in the second layer of spiritual ocean tier. His name was Lu Yue. He stared at Ling Han for a moment, but still thought that the latter looked unfamiliar to him. True, crashing the shops of others was only a small business for the Earth and Water faction, and could not possibly disturb such a high-ranking person as he, so he had no idea that the faction had made this kind of enemy. At this moment, a nearby middle-aged man's expression changed. He approached and whispered quietly into Lu Yu's ear. The old man nodded slightly and assumed a disapproving expression. Fuck, so it's just a small matter of several clothing stores being smashed. In Lu Yu's opinion, how could the value of a few clothing stores compare to the golden flower in the stone? You snatched a treasure from one of the members of the faction, and its value was several hundred times the value of those clothing stores that had been smashed. No matter how he looked at it, it was the Earth and Water faction that was the victim here. This brat had to be a young master from some wealthy family, spoilt since his birth. That was why he had been so impulsive, actually coming over to seek vengeance just because a few of his stores had been crashed. Heng, I don't know what you're talking about. You're simply trying to smear the name of our faction. Lu Yue completely denied the accusation of his stores being smashed by members of the faction. This was after all nothing to be proud of, though the Earth and Water faction was a faction of hooligans and ruffians in the eyes of the residents of the Imperial City. They had a high opinion of themselves. Leave behind the golden flower in the stone and pay a further compensation of 10 million, then you can get lost. He said aggressively to Ling Han. Ling Han laughed, and said, "How overbearing. However, do you have the ability to be overbearing?" He walked towards the main doors. Insolence. Immediately, someone jumped out and stretched out a hand to grab Ling Han's throat, intending to subdue him in a single move. Get lost. A person also jumped out from behind Ling Han. The light of his sword flowed like water and swept towards that man who had jumped out earlier. That man of the Earth and Water faction could not help but tense up and hurriedly bent to avoid the blow. There was now a middle-aged man standing in front of Ling Han, wielding a sword and exuding aura that was not the slightest bit weaker than his. Ling Han did not even pause in his steps, and continued his advance. Such a contemptuous attitude greatly enraged the people of the Earth and Water faction. They all jumped out and charged towards Ling Han. However, those people that Ling Han had hired were naturally not going to be paid for not doing anything. They too jumped out and protected Ling Han. This was a battle of 100 against 13. Ling Han's side was greatly at the advantage. Moreover, there were still 7 spiritual ocean tier elites who had yet to make a move. It was only now that Lu Yue discovered that there were 7 people whose aura was not any weaker than his, and he could not help but tense up. If they were in gushing spring tier, it would be useless no matter how many there were. He would only need to heavily injure a few of them quickly, and it was practically guaranteed that the rest would flee like rats. Lone cultivators were more ruthless than anyone at times when they were at an advantageous position, but once they fell into a disadvantage, then they would definitely be like a sheet of loose sand, and flee faster than anyone else. However, there now actually appeared 7 people in spiritual ocean tier. This could be problematic. This brat was indeed very wealthy, actually managing to hire spiritual ocean tier elites. No wonder he dared to come here to challenge them. Lu Yue thought for a moment, then said, "Friends, no matter what kind of conditions this brat has promised you, as long as you all choose to stand by and do nothing today, then whatever reward he has promised you will be from our Earth and Water faction." He was quite a decisive man. Xuanhuan laughed, and said, "Elder Lu, a man has to be true to his word. Moreover, we have already accepted the mission at the Heaven Military Hall. If we drop the ball now, who would dare to hire us in future?" "You know who I am?" Lu Yue asked. He. Elder Lu Yu's nickname is Soft Light Needle. No one would know when you used your hidden weapons. Who would not recognize you? Xuanhuan said calmly, then gave a wave of his hand and said, "The main character today is young Master Han. Anything you want to say it to young Master Han. We are just responsible for ensuring his safety." Old fox. Lu Yue cursed internally. He had wanted to use the Earth and Water faction to force him to submit, but he easily pushed all the responsibility onto Ling Han. This gave him a feeling like he had thrown a punch into a ball of wool. It was not a good feeling. "Brat, if you stop now, it's still not too late," he said to Ling Han. "As long as you pay the compensation for the losses of our faction, fuck." While he was chattering, Ling Han had suddenly thrown a powerful punch and actually punched down the inscribed sign hanging over their doors. With a ping, it fell onto the ground. The sign was made of bronze, and when it crashed onto the floor, it created a loud noise that shocked quite a few people. When the people of the Earth and Water faction saw this, their eyes reddened. That was the signboard of the Earth and Water faction. As the saying went, when you get into a fight, never aim for the face. This signboard was equivalent to the face of the Earth and Water faction, and now was punched down by Ling Han onto the ground. Naturally, everyone was enraged. Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, "You seem to have had quite a lot of fun in my stores last night. Today I will let you enjoy the same thing too." He raised his foot before suddenly slamming it down. The strength of a martial artist in the 9th layer of element gathering tier burst out, and the signboard was instantly broken into 2 halves. "You're seeking death." The members of the Earth and Water faction were all greatly enraged, wanting nothing more than to tear Ling Han into pieces. Though murder was against the law in the Imperial City, it did not mean that you still had to endure it when your enemies were at your doorstep. There would be no punishment for those who injured others or even killed their enemies in self-defense. Ignorant brat. Lu Yu's killing intent was on full display. He leaped towards Ling Han, raised his hand, and ziu, 9 golden needles flew out. These needles were instilled with his unique origin power and had the ability to pierce through any defenses of origin power. It was a vicious attack. "Elder Yue, your opponent is me." Xuanhuan gave a loud shout. His body lightly trembled and actually shone with an endless golden light, as if he was a Buddha. He struck out with one hand, and shouted, "The teachings of Buddha is without boundary, surpassing death." Hong! The golden light shone resplendently, indescribably vast and powerful. Ling Han did not even spare a glance. He simply continued to stride forward and entered the Earth and Water faction's headquarters. He smiled slightly, and said to Hu Niu, Come. Let's have a little contest, and see who can make more damage." "Niu will definitely win," Hu Niu said in exhilaration. End of the chapter. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao will be read in 5 chapters for every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. Please leave this sound novel and press subscribe, follow, and the bell so you don't miss any new clips as well. See you.